like to remind you that we have SOPs in place for your safety, so please make sure you adhere to them. And to our online audience, we're glad to have you join us as well this morning. This is a highly interactive session, and we would like to have as many voices heard so when you're submitting questions and comments, please use the hashtag #EndImpunityUG21. The event is streaming on YouTube as well, and we look forward to an exciting and engaging half day. My name is Rukshana, and many of you mostly know me as a broadcast journalist and a senior news anchor with Next Media Services, NBS TV more specifically. But I am also a communication specialist, currently chief of operations with a young ICT company called Audacity, and we believe that all dreams are valid regardless of geographical location. So we leverage ICT and to be the gateway to the new world. And I'm delighted to be hosting this event. I know that I speak for a lot of my colleagues in this room and the media fraternity and for other stakeholders who generally value the role of media in a democracy when I say that we long for a day journalists will be allowed to exercise their duty in the promotion of transparency, accountability, and freedom of speech, their duty to ensure that the country's citizenry has access to information, and we're allowed to provide a platform that keeps the public active and engaged without necessarily being gagged or harassed or threatened or even killed, as is the case in different parts of the world. And I also recognize that as journalists, we have a duty to be responsible in how we execute our work above all else. And this is what today is really about. As we mark the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, it is our hope that the dialogue we have today and the dialogues that we will continue to have will shine the spotlight on the need for all stakeholders to do a lot more. We have to realize that journalists and the media are a strong ally, and the relationship between the media and other actors like the security forces, for example, and government is a symbiotic relationship. We need each other for the effective execution of our responsibilities, obviously, to the citizenry of this country. Now, we have an exciting morning with a number of speakers, and I'll just quickly give you an overview of what to expect over the next couple of hours. So we will start off with the Secretary General, Uganda National Commission for UNESCO, who will make opening remarks. And then the event will formally be opened by His Excellency, the European Union Ambassador to Uganda. We will have a couple of videos where we will see what the European perspective is on challenges and responses in ending impunity for crimes against journalists. We also have a keynote address by the Director, Africa Policy Center, Uganda Christian University Mukono, Dr. Emily Marachto. That's promising to be a very interesting keynote presentation. It's one that you definitely want to listen to. We will then go into a panel discussion, and on the panel we will have the Executive Director, Uganda Media Women's Association, Margaret Sentamu Masagazi. We will have a representative from the media, that's Carlton Scovia Nakamia, a reporter with BBS TV, and we will have a Senior Superintendent of Police, Emilian Kaima, who is also a former spokesperson and is representing the Uganda Police Force. And we will have the Uganda People's Defense Forces represented by the Deputy Spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Kakurungu. That is going to be a very interesting discussion. And we will take a very short break. And when we return, we will have a message from the Committee to Protect Journalists in Nairobi, and it will be looking at the realities for journalists across Africa, because the challenges we face in Uganda are not necessarily exclusive to us. And thereafter, we will open up the floor to questions and answers and a whole discussion with both our in-person and online audience. Then we will have the Africa Institute for Investigative Journalism, and the Executive Director, Solomon Serwanja, will be joining us for a very short presentation on what's happening in that space, because we will all appreciate that investigative journalism is quite pivotal to driving change, but the threats are very real for them as well. And then we will have some closing remarks. The event will be closed by the State Minister for National Guidance in the Ministry of ICT. That is basically a rundown on what our event is going to look like. Just a reminder for those of you joining us online and those of you following via YouTube, the hashtag to use for the conversation and to be part of the conversation is hashtag end impunity UG21. So at this point in time, I'd like to invite Ms. Rosie Agoy, the Secretary General, Uganda National Commission for UNESCO, to make her welcome remarks.
Your Excellency, the European Union Ambassador to Uganda, representatives of the media and the journalists here with us today, representatives of the security services, representatives of the government agencies, civil society representatives present, our dear panelists, all our distinguished participants in your various capacities, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It is my honor and pleasure to be here today in this high-level dialogue designed to mark the International Day to End Impunity for the Crimes Against Journalists. On behalf of Uganda National Commission for UNESCO, we are grateful for you honoring our invitation to this important event, despite your very busy schedules, and of course, notwithstanding the fear of COVID-19, you have been brave enough to come, and we are really grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to briefly take you through who we are and how we are related to what we are going to do today. UNESCO, as you may already know, is a specialized agency of the United Nations founded in 1945 to contribute to the construction of peace, human development, and dialogue through education, the sciences, culture, communication, and information. UNESCO's contribution to world peace and development is based on its 5 functions: the laboratory of ideas and foresight, standard setter, clearinghouse, capacity building, and as a catalyst of international cooperation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have seen we have UNESCO, and I'm sure you have also seen around that we have the National Commission for UNESCO. And usually the two are, simply branded as UNESCO, but there is some difference. And I would like to clear the air by letting you know that national commissions for UNESCO are established in accordance with Article 7 of the UNESCO Constitution, and they are the interlocutor with UNESCO and member states at the national level to assist government ministries, departments, agencies, institutions, individuals, CBOs, NGOs in developing their plans and projects in line with UNESCO's guidelines and program work. The National Commission for UNESCO in Uganda was established in 1963, a year after Uganda attained independence. So in a similar way, like all the other national commissions in the 195 member states of UNESCO, we play similar roles, and it is within the 4 fields of competencies of education, science, culture, and communication, and information that we draw our program from. Now, today's program, or today's celebration or event, it falls under the communication and information program. And under this very program, we have a strategic intervention, which is to promote freedom of expression, media development, and access to information and knowledge. So the National Commission for UNESCO therefore strives to strengthen the national capacity to protect and promote freedom of expression, inclusive of press freedom, universal access of information and knowledge, and safety of all media workers. In this regard, we have been able to train journalists on issues related to objective reporting in many aspects, including election, promotion of freedom of expression, local content development, as well as promotion of safety mechanism for media workers as per the UN Plan of Action for the Safety of Journalists and the issues of impunity. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Day to End Impunity was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly in 2013 in recognition of the far-reaching consequences of impunity, especially of crimes against journalists. The resolution adopted at its 68th session urged member states to implement definite measures countering the present culture of impunity. The resolution condemns all attacks and violence against journalists and media workers. It also urges member states to do their utmost to prevent violence against journalists and media workers, to ensure accountability, bring to justice perpetrators of crimes against journalists and media workers, and ensure that victims have access to appropriate remedies. It calls upon states to promote a safe and enabling environment for journalists to perform their work independently and without undue interference. As a country, therefore, we have to do all these measures to ensure the safety of media workers and end the culture of impunity, because we are a member state of the UN, and therefore we have signed some of these conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to remind you that freedom of expression is a fundamental human right enshrined in the Constitution of Uganda. Article 29, Section 1(2) provides that everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression, of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes the right to freedom of expression and access to information. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression, which include the freedom to seek, receive, and impart knowledge and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Freedom of expression, ladies and gentlemen, therefore, is a right of high significance to other rights. It is also highly significant to sustainable development goals, especially goal number 16, that recognizes that public access to information and fundamental freedoms is a right. In this regard, therefore, freedom of expression is the lifeblood of democracy and sustainable development. Without the free flow of information and ideas, the public cannot form opinions and take decisions about issues confronting them in daily living. The media, therefore, plays a pivotal role to the promotion of the freedom of expression by empowering citizens with the information they require to exercise their democratic rights. In this case, all efforts, therefore, must be made to ensure their safety by promoting a safe and conducive working environment. Today, on the 9th International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, which is a UNESCO declared day, I salute all journalists, especially those who risk their safety and their lives to inform citizens with accurate reporting. As I conclude, I would like to take this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to convey our sincere thanks to the European Union delegation for the partnership that we are starting today in organizing this activity to mark this day for ending impunity. In a special way, I would like to thank Gilbert, Emmanuel, Timothy, Prudence, who are on the side of the EU delegation. On our side of the National Commission, I would like to introduce and thank the Assistant Secretary General. You may stand up. There was no opportunity for introduction. He's the Assistant Secretary General. Mr. Daniel Kawesi, who I think has stepped out, is the Program Officer for Communication and Information and has been working very closely with the EU delegation. And the Senior Information Scientist, Angela Atkunda, who is already doing her work, posting on social media and all that. She has the freedom of expression, in other words. So I would like to thank them very much for working very closely with us. Allow me therefore now to wish you very fruitful deliberations and a very good dialogue. And I say this for God and my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rose Agoy, Secretary General, Uganda National Commission for UNESCO. Now, as we mark the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, the European Commission has put out a statement today. I hope that those of you who are joining us in person have had access to that statement. It is on your tables. And I'd just like to draw your attention to a paragraph in there that talks about the fact that in the last 12 months, the EU has supported more than 400 journalists with emergency grants, temporary relocation, or support to their respective media outlets. And it also has dedicated programs that are implemented in all regions to support independent media and journalist safety. So the EU is doing a lot in this space. And now would be a good time to invite His Excellency, the European Union Ambassador to Uganda, Attilio Pacifici. I hope I got that right. You're welcome. Please come and make your opening remarks.
Honorable State Minister for National Guidance of the ICT Ministry, who will be delivering closing remarks to this event today, later on. The Secretary General of the Uganda National Commission for UNESCO, representatives of media and journalists here with us today, representatives of security services, representatives of other government agencies, civil society representatives present, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today at the opening of an event which marks a very important international day. Let me say at the outset how pleased we are to have partnered on this event with the Uganda National Commission for UNESCO. Madam Secretary General, thank you for your remarks just now, and thanks also to your team for the good cooperation in preparing for this event. As we all know, protecting journalists and therefore enabling the free flow of information and opinion is one of the vital elements of any successful democratic society. However, in today's world, being a journalist is not an ordinary job, and in some cases, it is a profession which comes with very, very high risks. There is a problem all around the world. Globally, a 2021 report on the global state of democracy by the Varieties of Democracy Institute provides hard evidence that the threat to freedom of expression and the media is intensifying, contributing to a general erosion of democracy across the globe. I will say something about the situation in Europe, but first, let me focus on the situation in Uganda. I have to say that the current state of play is not encouraging. Over the past year, we have seen some terrible attacks, including a photojournalist being shot in the face at point-blank range with a rubber bullet, a female journalist being knocked to the ground and beaten on the head and the body by a male security operative, and several violent arrests of journalists during the electoral campaign. There are more examples beside this. In most of these cases, despite months and sometimes years of court battles, nobody has been arrested or prosecuted or found guilty for these crimes. The examples I gave are real events showing the kind of shocking and dangerous treatment that some journalists have faced in the past 12 months. The Human Rights Network for Journalists Uganda Press Freedom Index for 2020 recorded 174 individual press freedom violations, of which well over a third were assaults against journalists. There were also a high number of cases where journalists were arrested. Last year, as the election campaign was underway, we also witnessed the closure of radio stations and the prevention of access to radio stations for opposition candidates. We saw the deportation of foreign journalists and last-minute change of rules regarding how journalists were to be accredited to the cover of the elections. The experience of journalists on the campaign trail was also troubling. Later in this event, we will watch a short movie detailing how some of these threats and abuses faced by reporters. In terms of alleged perpetrators, the report of the Human Rights Network for Journalists Uganda indicates that the Uganda Police Force and the Uganda People Defense Forces were responsible for over two-thirds of the violations. Obviously, there is no justification for such treatment of women and men who are simply trying to do their jobs. Let me repeat, ladies and gentlemen, for the records, that journalism is not a crime. Of course, in our times, it is not just on the streets that journalists face threats and abuse. While it allows for the free exchange of information like never before, the internet also creates risks for journalists. Online harassment, hate speech, and surveillance are becoming increasingly common. The risks faced by women journalists online are particularly serious. These are issues that governments need to get to grips with all over the world, including in European countries. Indeed, attacks on journalists are worryingly on the rise in Europe too. As you will hear in the video message recorded by my Brussels-based colleague Tom Miller in just a few moments, the European Union is taking these threats very seriously and responding accordingly, with an important new media freedom law on the way in 2022. This is an important initiative, particularly as serious attacks, including killings, continue to happen in some of our European Union member states. As the European Union at home tries to take action against this, the European Union delegation in Uganda is also prioritizing media freedom and the protection of journalists, both through the projects we fund and through our diplomatic engagements with the government and with other stakeholders in this country. Our project partnerships on strengthening of the media and the protection of journalists are very important to us, and I'm pleased to see a number of our partners here today. Through our funding to the Uganda Radio Network, the European Union is supporting journalists to undertake conflict-sensitive journalism in the pre- and post-election periods. Our work with the African Center for Media Excellence sees capacity-building support to journalists all across the country to undertake investigative journalism projects. We are also pleased to have supported the Uganda Photo Award for many, many years. Through the Democratic Governance Facility, the DGF, the European Union has also been supporting a wide range of partners, including the Uganda Women's Association, who I'm also pleased to see here today. Let me take this opportunity to once again express my strong wish that the DGF be unsuspended. We have been engaging on this matter now for too long, and we know that it is important, and it is the important work that partners in governments, institutions, and civil society should be doing that suffers. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, issues related to media freedom are sensitive, particularly when journalists attempt to cover issues related to politics, security, and natural resources. However, progress in any area of development, anywhere in the world, particularly concerning the proper use of public funds, particularly concerning the use of protection of key natural resources, education, healthcare, infrastructure, the extractive industries, or the promotion of investments, can only be enhanced through the free exchange of information and ideas. People have the right to know about issues affecting their lives and about projects which are paid from public funds. And for such transparency and scrutiny to happen, journalists must be protected and feel safe and secure in the work they do. Eventually, we will all suffer. The consequence is journalists are driven out of their professions, or if they start, avoiding difficult topics or inflicting self-censorship on themselves out of fear of being harassed or attacked. Accountability for abuses is crucial, and I'm very glad to see that many stakeholders have come together here today, media, government, security agencies, and civil society, for what I hope it will be a very frank and unusual discussion on an important topic. I urge all of us to engage in these discussions with open minds and to identify areas in which tangible progress can be made, be that in how public events are policed, how journalists are accredited and protected, how complaints are handled and cases dealt with. From the European Union side, we do not seek to prescribe solutions. We can only recall that solutions should be found at the national level by the relevant stakeholders. On a point of principle, however, it is clear that Uganda can do a better job, on the one side, on the one hand, in protecting its journalists, and on the other hand, in sanctioning those found to have violated the constitutional rights of journalists. As long-standing partners of Uganda, we stand ready to support these efforts. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by thanking you all again for taking the time to be here with us today, and I look forward to an interesting and candid discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, as we all know, obviously, violation of journalists' rights is not exclusive to Uganda. It happens in East Africa, it happens world over, and there is prudence in looking around the world and seeing what other people are doing and the challenges that they face and the responses that they've put up, and perhaps pick a leaf from there and see what we can do in our own country. So at this point in time, I'd just like to invite you to take a look, to watch a short video, a short message from the European Union headquarters. And it's basically the European perspective on the challenges and responses in ending impunity for crimes against journalists. And it is in the hope that we will pick a couple of things from what's happening in that space.
Hello everyone. Between 2006 and 2020, over 1,200 journalists have been killed around the world, with close to 9 out of 10 cases of these killings remaining judicially unresolved. While Europe continues to be the safest continent for journalists, press freedom and journalist safety are in decline in line with a global trend, with several countries sliding down the annual RSF index. According to RSF, COVID has had a negative impact on press freedom in Europe, with only a few countries, such as Finland, Denmark and Sweden, able to sufficiently maintain press freedom in the face of the pandemic. There has been a broad, sustained crackdown on media freedom in a number of countries, and in recent years, journalists have been killed because of their work across Europe, in Greece, Malta, Slovakia, the Netherlands, and Northern Ireland, for example. Justice for these crimes against journalists is often inconsistently or inadequately pursued, and in addition to the culture of impunity for perpetrators of physical threats, journalists often face online abuse, particularly female journalists. Media outlets also face legal threats from strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPs as they're called, designed to silence journalists and to put small media outlets out of business. Violence and harassment against women journalists has continued to rise, notably online. The COVID pandemic has increased threats to journalists across the world, as many journalists continue to report events without proper PPE and to suffer rising physical threats. Many governments use the COVID pandemic to increase levels of harassment, imprisonment and violence against journalists. The good news is that President von der Leyen gave details of a new EU Media Freedom Act in her State of the Union speech in September 2021. She noted, amongst other things, that media companies cannot be treated as just another business. Defending media freedom means defending our democracy. The Media Freedom Act, planned for 2022, will introduce mechanisms to increase freedom of the press. It should help reverse the culture of impunity for crimes against journalists and provide tools to address online abuse, particularly of female journalists. The Act would also be an opportunity to look at the resilience of small actors, innovative funding models, support to public media and structures for independent funding of media. It will also help protect media outlets from legal threats such as the SLAPs I mentioned earlier. In September 2021, the Commission also published its non-binding recommendations on the safety of journalists. This aims to ensure safer working conditions for all media professionals, free from fear and intimidation, whether online or offline. It sets out concrete actions for member states to take, with a particular attention to female journalists. Many of the recommended actions are relevant in any context and can provide a model for advocacy, including establishment of a multi-stakeholder framework for journalist protection that includes, wherever possible, a range of actors from government, police, justice sector, media, civil society, human rights groups and so on. And the recommendations, of course, are aligned with the UN Action Plan on Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. Let me conclude by just reminding you that the EU Human Rights and Democracy Action Plan 2020-24 provides a framework for all our external actions in support to human rights and democracy. Media, of course, is one of the key priorities, and safety and security of journalists a particular focus. Based on this, EU delegations around the world are working to protect journalists and support their work. Thank you very much.
Mr. Thomas Miller, Head of Sector Democratic Governance, European Commission International Partnerships Directorate General, with a European perspective on challenges and responses in ending impunity for crimes against journalists. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker this morning is someone who is widely recognized, and you will, when you do engage with her presentation, you will understand why. She was awarded the Next Generation Social Sciences in Africa Doctoral Dissertation Research Fellowship 2015 to study development studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal on media, women and public life in Uganda, interrogating representation, interaction and engagement. She leads the faculty, or she was leading the Faculty of Journalism, Media and Communication at the University of Uganda Christian University of Mukono, with a new department of Journalism and Media Studies Department. She previously taught development policy, development economics, and development management at Makerere University and UCU for over a decade, while pursuing a career in communication and media studies at Daystar University, Kenya, and University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, respectively. Our speaker has also trained journalists in Uganda on gender-sensitive reporting and election coverage in partnership with the UN Human Rights. She has supported several government departments in the area of communication, policy analysis, and training. And in addition, she is an active participant in Uganda's media and a columnist with the Daily Monitor newspaper, which she uses to advocate for gender and social justice in public policy. Our keynote speaker today started her career at the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company Limited in 2003 and is now a leader in many spheres of influence, education, and media. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Emily Comfort Marak. Hold on. Marachto. Yes, I got that. Yes, and she is the Director, Africa Policy Center at the Uganda Christian University, Mukono. Please do come and deliver your keynote address.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start with a short story. When I came this morning, my friend Guma, seated over there, told me he was very happy and he was looking forward to hearing my address. And he said, I hope you're not going to give us some academic gibberish here. And I told him that's very sad because today I'm actually going to do exactly that. It's not what I normally do, but it's what I'm going to actually do. So Honorable Dr. Chris Baryomonsi, Minister of ICT and National Guidance, His Excellency Attilio Pashifishi, hope I've got that right as well, Ms. Rosie Agoy, and the representative of International Partnerships or European External Action Service, Mr. Muthoki Momo, CPJ Nairobi, and all protocol observed, as we normally say, for all the important people here. Now, I'm really honored to be speaking at this event because this is one of the kinds of issues that I'm very passionate about. I'm particularly interested in issues around safety of journalists and the media environment. And this is what has been occupying me for several years now. But each time I think about these commemorative events, I ask myself really, of what practical value are they? Why do we gather every year to talk about things? And sometimes it feels like we just gather ourselves as elite and sit in these rooms and can be challenged for what more are we really adding. But I should say that these events are important because they serve as reminders for us that there are some things that still matter and we should be thinking about them. They remind us of our duties and responsibility to humanity for equality and justice. Even for those who have heard these things so many times over and over, it bears repeating because sometimes it's hard to imagine that people are actually listening. So this is one of those days when we actually are trying to remind ourselves of these things. Now, the questions for me are really, who is a journalist and why does journalism even matter? Because today, many people think that as long as you have a phone, you're a journalist. You can report, you can do whatever journalists do. But maybe we need to remind ourselves again who a journalist actually is. And what is impunity and why does it persist? I think that's also an important question. Why does impunity persist and why do we talk about it all the time? And having said that, how can we end impunity and protect journalists, because if we don't understand why impunity persists, we may not really know how to protect journalists or how to end it. So I'll start by really attempting to define who a journalist is, despite much scholarly, and industry differences on the subject, like I've said. Now, Obonyo and Nyaboga, I warned you. So in their book, Journalists and the Rule of Law, suggests that professional journalists are those on the payroll of a journal or electronic media, and they report for their paper or radio, television station, or write features or editorials or edit or even shoot news, pictures, and photographs. Now, if you're not on the payroll of any of these, you probably are a communicator and you're doing some work related to communication. But they go on to add that in media houses where these services are hired, we may know them by various names. We may know them as editors, as reporters, as photographers, as sub-editors, as so many other names that if you read my paper, you will find. I'll not go into detail of all the different names there. But as such, journalists then deal with facts. And these facts are expressed in words. And that means that journalists are also guided by certain principles of accuracy, of honesty, of sensitivity to news as universal assets. It doesn't matter where you do your trade of journalism, these things matter. And that means that whether you're in Uganda or you're in serving within the European Union, you actually are governed by some of these issues. And it is these assets that often put journalists in harm's way, especially where honesty and truth may not serve some interests of those in power. And and I think that's why investigative journalists we hear are very few, and that particular trade is very difficult to come by in our spaces. Now, this distinction is very important because in this era of new media, a lot of people assume that they are journalists. And I think His Excellency over there, who has a good phone, I have seen it because I had the benefit of sitting near him, might take pictures and share it with his family, but that doesn't make him a journalist. There's something else that makes a journalist, and we have to think about that. So in this era where professional journalism and amateur, forgive my word for using amateur or citizen journalism, is often conflated to mean one thing, it presents a lot of challenges for how to protect journalists, because then we don't know who a journalist actually is. With social media, it has become difficult for most people to even distinguish between the work of professional journalists and those that are, and by professional journalists, I mean those who have received training of journalism and are doing work that I described earlier. So it's difficult to distinguish between their work and that of citizen journalists, and that has also made solutions for protection of journalists very, very difficult. Journalists and journalism are used in broad terms to define activities associated with news making. And that's the key point. And that the people who engage in them are the ones we might refer to as journalists. And this is where some of us might refer to citizen journalists who actually engage in that kind of thing as journalists. And there's a debate in academia whether we should even call them journalists. Why not find another name for them if that's important? But why is protecting journalists so important a goal for us, and why should we be discussing it? I'm sure those who have been at the logistics of these, you know how much you've spent for us to sit here, for the tea and all of us to come. Why is it important? Because journalism matters. Journalists give people information with which to understand the world and make decisions about their lives. Consider the journalist who reports about a broken bridge ahead that enables you to take a different route and avoid an accident. Consider even those that report on the morning traffic every day and allows you to make important decisions of which route to use and which one not to use. Whether we treat journalism as a profession or an institution or a set of practices, the role of the journalist, despite changing circumstances, remain very important, and we need to protect them. Yet, journalists and journalism are visibly under threat. We are told, and I'm picking this from the concept note that was shared with me, that while killings are the most extreme form of media censorship, journalists are also subjected to countless threats, like ranging from kidnapping, torture, and other physical attacks to harassment, particularly in the digital sphere. And we also know that threats of violence and attacks against journalists in particular create a climate of fear for media professionals, impeding the free flow of circulation of information, opinions, and ideas of all citizens. What is more disturbing about these issues is we are told globally over 1,200 journalists were killed in 2020, and 9 out of 10 cases remain judicially unresolved. 9 out of 10. So if 10 of us journalists in this room had issues, only 1 case was ever resolved. And that's huge. In Uganda in 2020 alone, the Human Rights Network for Journalists, it is quoted, said, found 174 cases of human rights violations and abuse against journalists and media practitioners. Now, most of us remember these incidents, and because we have a panel and so on, I did not want to go into bringing about the examples of these incidents, and that's for the rest of us to discuss. But those of us who live here know about these incidents and have witnessed them on our television screens or been part of them. But just think about the number and paint a picture. As is often the case in disturbing situations, female journalists or women journalists face a more increasing risk as a result of doing their work, even in Uganda. And I think Rukshana mentioned it, that it's not just in Uganda, it's something that we are talking about globally. Now, I'd like to paint a small picture. Years ago, I watched the movie We Were Soldiers. And I don't know how many of you have watched the movie, but it's a riveting account of the Vietnam War and how the journalists who covered the war began to feel like they were the ones who were soldiers and even had to pick up guns and fight. Now, when journalists operate in situations like that, they need protection. Who is going to protect them? In answering the question of impunity, which in my definition is literally to get away with murder, because you know that you can do things that you will not be accountable for and you don't need to account for. Now, in answering the question of impunity, we are told that the cycle of violence against journalists is often an indicator of the weakening of the rule of law and of the judicial system. One might therefore add, and this is my addition, that the reason impunity persists, because I like to know why things persist, but in my observation, the reason impunity persists is a weak judicial system and unstable rule of law, but which are not by themselves the real problem. And I do think that a weak judicial system is symptomatic of other problems in our democratic framework. For example, a shrinking space for expression, intolerance of dissenting views, and disregard for rule of law. That somehow people can do things that they think the law will not catch them. And we watch this, by the way, even in our daily endeavors, the culture of impunity. It's not just the state that we can accuse of perpetuating impunity, but even citizens. When you drive in the morning, you see how people don't follow the traffic rules, they don't stay in their lane, there's a general culture of impunity and that there's a disregard for the rule of law. So what is there to be done in a weak judicial system that cannot sustain a stable rule of law? What possibly can me, Emily, suggest that will be done to actually end impunity in a system like that? Are there options for ending impunity and protecting journalists in a country like Uganda, which arguably has a fairly weak judicial system? In societies where the most fundamental values are actually betrayed, is it realistic to expect that ending impunity and protection of journalists are going to be possible? Maybe that's a question for us to think through. Now, UNESCO has done well to produce incredible resources that are informative and toolkits that would render a keynote address like this of little value. But again, my experience is that few people engage with these materials. They are available, incredible resources online that UNESCO has produced over the years, including protection of journalists, including safety for journalists and many of these things that are important to us today. So for that reason, I will be offering my thoughts on ending impunity and protecting journalists by focusing on the influence of legislation, of politics and institutions, while drawing on practical work of others. And by drawing on the practical work of others, I wish to let you hear from other people rather than from me, because it might be more profound. Now, one of the proposals I make is that we have to try and have a pursuit and protection of freedom, because most constitutions provide for freedom. And I think somebody talked about Article 29 in our constitution that provides for media freedom and freedom of the press and other media. And our Chapter 4 of the 1995 Constitution adequately provides for human rights. Now, why then do we continue to speak of impunity for crimes against journalists when there are actually legal frameworks for protection? The answer, in part, is our lack of appreciation for freedom. To understand freedom, I look to Angela Merkel's concept of freedom, and I like to draw from it because it's very practical. It is said of Angela Merkel that she would not have become Chancellor of Germany if she had been rigidly stuck to one position and had not shown flexibility in adapting to the views of both the left and the right. And for Merkel, without freedom, there is nothing. To her, freedom is the joy of achievement, the flourishing of the individual, the celebration of difference, the rejection of mediocrity, and personal responsibility. It is often clear that the harassment and other threats against journalists stem from an absence of or respect for freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press and other media, despite constitutional guarantees for these. And in order to end impunity for crimes against journalists, we need to redefine our concept of freedom and to pursue and protect freedom with passion. Only then can we speak of protecting journalists. So Merkel suggests that freedom is concerned first and foremost with responsibility, that on the one hand, you have a freedom from something, and on the other hand, freedom to do something, and which often means we are always speaking about the freedom of the other, not necessarily our freedom. You may have the freedom to play loud music in your house, but you also should think about the freedom of your neighbor to sleep, that kind of thing. So in that regard, therefore, freedom, the secret for freedom, she argues, is actually courage. How often do we have the courage to speak when we have our issues around our freedom? When as journalists, we cannot do our work because we do not have the freedom to do something, or we think that our media owner is going to send us home for giving the story we have given, or which has offended some advertising agency or whatever, all these kinds of things. So do we have the courage to face these things? If we do not have the courage, that's a starting point. 2, the second thing we can do is tempering regulation and positive media or communication policy. Now, my work around media regulation has often made the case for media communication policy that enables regulation to work for the industry, and that means it cannot be only regulation to minimize harm, as it is often the case in security concerns, that you can shut the internet because some people are going to be harmed, that you can do this kind of thing because you're minimizing harm, because you don't want the business person to get harmed, and so on. So in essence, we are dealing with an over-regulated system where one might think there is a law for everything. And by 2013, I studied media laws, policies, and bills in Uganda in my research, and including others like the Anti-Terrorism Act, and it was astounding. We should ask ourselves what really motivates our regulation. What's the motivation behind every single law that we have in our books? And for those that affect the media, they are numerous. There's a kind of numerous attempt. So again, I'll borrow From Robert Massey in his riveting account of Catherine the Great, an obscure German princess who became one of the most remarkable, powerful, and captivating women in history, transforming herself into an empress of Russia by sheer determination. He tells the story of her unlimited power, and when she was asked about why she thought she had unlimited power, this is what she had to say. She said, "In the first place, my orders would not be carried out unless they were the kind of orders which could be carried out. And you know with what prudence and circumspection I act in the promulgation of my laws. I examine the circumstances, I take advice, I consult the enlightened part of the population, and in this way, I find out in advance if my laws are going to be approved, and only then do I issue orders." That is the foundation of unlimited power. But believe me, they will not obey blindly when orders are not adapted to the opinion of the people. And I think part of impunity is that we have orders that are not adapted to the needs of the people or to the views of the people. And the key issues here for me is that being the motivation of the law, the consideration of the impact it might have, and consultation of those it will affect. And I think the ambassador did speak of the changing terrain during the elections of, registration of journalists and so on. Of course, Catherine the Great did not have it easy. She had to deal with domestic rebellion. She had to do foreign wars and tidal wave of political chance and, the French Revolution and so on. But the key thing is that as a state faced with those things, what do you have to do that then allow your citizens to still be able to enjoy some degree of freedom? And I think that's the most important part. And some of the laws we have can no longer protect journalists except to punish wrongdoing or perceived misbehavior, and sometimes very selectively. And we have for some time been discussing the need for review of the Press and Journalists Act of 1995, which for all intents and purposes has been overtaken by changes in the communication landscape brought by technology. And the rapid changes in the industry requires regulation that is tempered by reason and a media and communication policy that is positive, that actually enables the industry to thrive. Otherwise, we will not be able to protect journalists. Now, the third thing, which for me is the most important thing actually, is that we need to strengthen our judicial systems. And again, earlier, I think in reference to Guma's wish that I just speak off my head, somebody got me onto TV to talk. But and one of the things that we have to really think about is that unless our judicial system is found on the principles of humanity and equal justice, it will be futile to talk about ending impunity. I'll draw from an observation made by Israel's Chief Justice in 2003, which is relevant for our discussion today. Now, then Chief Justice Aharon Barak explained the compelling need to secure the safety of the state and of its citizens on the one hand, and a proper regard for human dignity and freedom on the other hand. That somehow the need for you to keep freedom should not be at the expense of your security and so on. And this is particularly relevant for us because of the discussion we are having right now about even the right to have bail. And because some of the people who may not qualify for bail will be you journalists, you should pay attention and engage with these ideas and offer solutions. But this is what Chief Justice Barak had to say, that it is the fate of a democracy that not all means are acceptable to it, and not all methods employed by its enemies are open to it. So if your enemies are chopping people up, that is not an option for you because you're a democracy. And sometimes he says, a democracy must fight with one hand tied behind its back. Nonetheless, it will still have an upper hand because preserving the rule of law and recognition of individual liberties constitute an important component of a democracy's understanding of security and safety. That's from that Chief Justice. In his view, the use of violence should not be tolerated in a democratic system, and as scenes of journalists dispersed with tear gas and brutalized because they have gone to cover an enemy of the state are very disturbing. And those who get involved in such violence can only be persecuted in a judicial system that works. If a judicial system does not work, it will not protect those journalists, or they will not get justice. Now, that system must be where accountability means something. But sadly, stories out of this judicial system in Uganda tend to perceive, and I use the word perceive because that is the perception, tend to perceive and paint a mixed picture of both mediocrity and incompetence, a system that rarely serves justice or at best delays it. And these often render the laws, even good ones, dysfunctional. Because even for the good laws to be implemented, you need a functional judicial system. You need a functional and well-institutionalized system of investigation and things like those. So in order to protect journalists, we should be assured of a judicial system where, as Oliver Wendell Holmes suggests, a judge would have intellectual honesty about available policies, disciplined self-restraint in respecting majority's policy choice, and principled commitment to defense of individual autonomy. If we cannot say these of our judges or of our judicial system, then it is difficult for us to say we can protect journalists and end impunity. We cannot expect that if this judicial system does not work for politically motivated persecution, or protect women who suffer gender-based discrimination or violence, that it will work to protect journalists. So while we are here gathered for journalists, we must ask ourselves, does this system work for anyone else? Does it work for farmers whose land has been taken? Does it work for housewives who have been thrown out of their homes by their cultural system? Does it work for children who cannot go to school? All of these things should matter to us. And we should think about ourselves as journalists. And if it doesn't work for us, then it is our responsibility and duty to shine light on where it's not working for those that cannot speak for themselves. And that's the key point. So a judicial reform is going to be a critical element of ending impunity at all levels. And lastly, I'm about to end. Lastly, as journalists, the last thing I talk about is taking journalists and journalism seriously. I think that increasingly it's hard to take journalists and journalism seriously in many ways. And as a result, and as journalists face threats of different kinds, journalism is faced with existential threats and questions about its survival. I think I sit in many meetings and I want to remember, and often people are asking, when I headed the Department of Journalism at Journalism and Media Studies, the most question I was asked was, is there still relevance for journalism? Is there even need to have journalists, to train journalists? You know, these journalists, they will count for you faults of journalists and how journalists are no longer professional, they cannot be trusted. The sins of journalists are usually this far. And I would take all those sins and ask myself, what are we doing for journalism anyway to make it have less sins than it already does? Because if we expect good from journalism, then we must invest in it. And are we investing? So journalism is facing that kind of threat, the question of its survival, and we are confronted with issues around the viability of media and which is the journalist's platform and tool of trade. Journalism faces a crisis of public trust and credibility, and COVID-19 has actually exacerbated some of its earlier challenges. So Babi Saliza, in her book, Taking Journalism Seriously, writes that we should have conversations about concerns of survival of journalism, and advises that there is need to map out ways in which we might take journalism seriously. And by seeing And we might take it seriously by seeing both its shadows and its lights. There is no doubt journalism has its shadows, and there is no doubt it has its lights. But can we map those out? What are its shadows? What are its lights? And how can we cast light on its shadows, and how can we keep the light going? And those are, for me, the most really important things. And we have to do that in so many ways, very broadly, very creatively, and without prejudice. Because I think in most cases when we speak journalism, we actually are very prejudiced. Journalism is a subject I'm very passionate about, so forgive my passion in speaking about this. But this is more so today because we do not see the value of journalists or appreciate the role that they play in a democratic framework. Much of what we say appears to remain actually on the surface. When we meet people like Rukshana, we want them to feel important, but actually we disrespect journalism. Not even the community or citizens judging journalists for failing the test of credibility can protect them. So in your community, will your neighbors rise up and say, we are going to protect Rukshana because she's a journalist and she reads for us the news every night? I'm afraid that might not be the case. So in conclusion, I would like to revisit the UN Charter, which in its preamble declared one of its aims to regain faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. And that calls for constantly looking at things differently. We might have been saying these things for so many years, but we still need to keep saying them. We still need to repeating some of these things, and we still need to sometimes look at things a little more differently than we do. And to move beyond just declarations and gathering to say, impunity must end, but what actions are we actually taking to ensure that impunity ends, to ensure that journalists are protected? So we should look at impunity and protection of journalists differently beyond declarations and legality. And journalists need to take their role seriously and actively seek to influence laws and policies that affect them, shine their spotlight in the perceived weak judicial system, and exemplify democratic principles, as well as have the courage to ask the good questions. If journalists are not asking the good questions, then we may not have hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Emily. I did promise that this was going to be a keynote address that would get you thinking deep and hard about the conversation on ending impunity. And if it hasn't, it really should. Just a quick recap on a couple of things that our keynote speaker has pointed to in terms of proposing 4 ways to end what we're calling impunity, which in her own words is getting away with murder. And I believe we have seen and continue to see that with cases of journalists assaulted, harassed, and little or no justice seen to be served right from the investigations level to court. So the judicial system in many regards may be failing the fight to end impunity, among other things. So 4 key issues she has raised: the pursuit and protection of the freedoms as provided for in the Constitution. But to do so, she makes a case and says it calls for understanding of these freedoms and respect for the freedoms, which is freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of press and the media. And perhaps we might need to redefine what freedom really is. Because if we do not do that, then maybe we're not reading from the same hymn book. Dr. Emily also made a case for media and communication policy that enables the regulation work for the industry, as opposed to over-regulation, which is skewed to one end, and that's normally to minimize harm. When you approach it from the prism of minimizing harm, that is the only agenda you have. You cannot think of anything else. And the judicial system must work and be seen to work, and only then can there be true accountability. In the absence of accountability, it becomes very, very difficult to do what we're trying to do. And the conversation on judicial reforms has been going on in Uganda for the last couple of years. And Dr. Emily calls for this as well. If we're to talk about ending impunity, we need to revisit the judicial system. Last and certainly not least, and maybe my colleagues in this room may not be very happy with this proposition, but it is the truth, and we need to take journalists and journalism seriously, but it does begin with those that are practicing it. And she poses a question. Are we dealing, or this is a question I picked, are we dealing with a crisis of trust and credibility? And that's a question that we need to actually think about in the media. And we need to answer that question even as we pursue our freedoms. So at this point in time, it's time for us to have a discussion, a panel discussion. And as I said at the start of this conversation, we have an interesting lineup of panelists. And I'd like to invite panelists to come up one by one as I introduce them. One of our panelists this morning is the Executive Director, Uganda Media Women's Association, Miss Margaret Sentamu Masagazi. Kindly take your seat. And as she makes her way up, I would like to also invite Carlton Scovia Nakamia, reporter with BBS Television. And she is one of those who really knows what it means to be in the thick of covering a story and being at the receiving end of brutality in the line of duty. And as she will attest, it is not easy being a woman in this industry. It is difficult for anyone in this industry, but it is more complex as a woman. And you don't exactly get to choose what stories you cover, because when you sign up for the job, you sign up for the job. Thank you, Carlton, for joining us this morning. I'd also like to invite the Senior Superintendent of Police, Emilian Kaima, who is representing the Uganda Police Force. Many of you will remember SSP Kaima during his days as the police spokesperson. I think he has gone down in the history of our work as one of probably the most accessible police spokesperson. So that is a good thing. So welcome. We had been expecting a representative from the UPDF, but they're not yet here, and we're not sure if they're going to join us. But we will definitely get started with our conversation. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, Emilian, Miss Masagazi, and Carlton. And I'd just like to start off by asking each one of you to just take maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes to just share what your key takeouts have been from the keynote address. And we will start with, I don't know if the microphone is on. Is it switched on? The lot has fallen on SSP Emilian. Do kick it off, please. Your key takeouts from the keynote address.
Thank you very much, Rukhsana, and thank you everyone, protocol observed. I've been introduced and I represent the Inspector General of Police for this very, very important conversation. Safety of journalists. I want to thank everybody who spoke before us, and they made very, very important. They gave us very important messages to take home, especially Dr. Emily, very, very balanced, and taking roles and responsibilities to each of us. What is my take in this, and what's our take as the police force? One, we take safety of everyone very, very important. More so, journalists. We have a very close working relationship with media houses, with journalists. But there are issues. There are issues that keep coming. And we try as much as possible to address these in a very open and very honest manner. Unfortunately, they don't go away. They keep coming. We keep seeing reports of journalists who are abused, who are brutalized, who are intimidated. And we ask, what is the problem? Is the problem with us as law enforcement? Is the problem with the law? Is the problem with the journalists? And our take is this. that there is a problem everywhere which we need to address. One, in our boardrooms and in our operations, issues of safety, issues of respecting rule of law, issues of human rights come up every other day. And right from seniors to juniors, the information keeps coming. Respect this. We have taken a step of holding individual officers who abuse these rights, and they're prosecuted criminally, but also disciplinarily. And that has happened. And we've done it in the open eyes of everyone, including media houses. But again, who is a journalist? For me, that bothers me. And out of the 174 reports given, I ask, if they are not resolved, there is a problem we need to examine here. And for me, the problem is, are media houses protecting these journalists? They protect, or exploiting them? How many of the journalists out there who do their good job are they employed, trained, monitored, guided every other day? Many of them are freelancers who are paid because of the story they run and who suffer on their own. The laws are very clear here. We follow the law. If, for example, a journalist is beaten in the course of in the line of duty, what's the procedure? You make a report, statements are recorded, it's investigated, we go to DPP, we go to court. It's a long process. The journalists feel that this is the right way to go, or they want justice there and then. And that's a danger. It cannot be there and then. Sometimes when we lose cases in courts, it's taken as impunity. Is it because we didn't like? No, we want to punish this. But remember, in criminal justice, responsibility is taken on the state. You who is investigating, bring the evidence, standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. It takes a lot to incriminate this suspect and bring them to court. We have cases where those who have gone out of their way as individuals have been punished, and those cases are there with you. But even one case, 170 is too many cases. Those are very many. Even one is bad enough. Because if a journalist is intimidated and they're not going to do a good job, then they are going to go into self-censorship or even change the profession. Yet there was a calling. So we need, I think, to rethink as media houses, one, to have our officers, our journalists protected. What is it that stops us from following these cases one by one to the end? What prohibits? For me, that's my worry. What prohibits? Because if you think the police, which is not true, is not interested, let's go into private prosecution. Because for us, if a case does not merit prosecution criminally, we go through disciplinary courts, and officers have been punished. Officers have lost their ranks. Officers have lost their deployments. Officers have been dismissed, and we have cases of that. Therefore, it's really a duty for all of us to look deep into this and then move forward, because journalists do a great job getting information, transmitting this information, holding everybody, especially us who are in government, to be accountable. And that annoys a few people, state and non-state actors. And then the mechanism to protect each of you must be there. Now, those that are there, have we exploited them fully? Those are questions that I ask. Way forward in this case. Meetings like these are very crucial. Even when we think, is anybody listening? They're very, very important. 2, joint trainings to appreciate each other's roles. Peer reviews to appreciate where we make mistakes and then correct them and move forward, because every evening we are all glued on TV, on radio to listen what has happened. And these people who broadcast, who investigate, who hold us to account are doing a good job and in harm's way. So we should be able to protect them. The will on the part of the police is total. So let's find the missing gaps and then purge them. I want to thank you.
So Emilian, before you hand over the microphone, you have suggested, first of all, you have proposed that the media, first of all, needs to also follow through the cases, yes, right, and make sure that they are concluded.
True.
So that's a burden that's sitting on our media houses. Then you also mentioned the fact that there is need to work closely together. Why is that happening? If it's not happening, why is it not happening? Because you seem to already know what needs to be done. Why is it not happening?
Because I think the will on the other side.
Which is the other side?
The media houses. I think is missing because,
okay,
let me tell you, we have platforms where we engage with journalists every day, every hour, every week. We have physical interface with journalists. We do 1,000 programs with the journalists. But then we ask, why do these complaints keep coming? Why? Is it something that those who are interested in these rights look one side and avoid the other? I don't know. So we need to really do peer reviews openly and honestly and maintain the credibility bit along the spectrum.
I've seen Mr. Robert Sempala nodding his head. I'm sure he'll have something very interesting to say about that a little later on. Let's just would like to? Okay. Please. Okay. Please do. Make my contribution. Yes. Let's have Ms. Margaret Sentam Masagazi give her overall quick take on the keynote address before we can go into what you feel about the proposal to redefine freedoms.
Madam Moderator, I would like to request that maybe I make my contribution because I'm not feeling that well, but I made a point that I come here and speak to my colleagues here.
Sure.
And definitely the keynote address, my takeaway, we need to take our profession serious. And then we are stakeholders in all these things. It's not only journalists, but also government, agencies, civil society, and all of us. And we are responsible for what goes on in this country. The media takes a big role in what kind of development we have, because we play a very major role to shape people's opinions, that agenda setting role, and all those things. So if now you can allow me to go straight to my reflections on how we can protect journalists and also maybe end impunity in this country. I want to start by saying that my views for now have been informed by our interaction with a number of journalists, because we have been training, particularly female journalists across the country, and we have also done studies on the safety and security against female journalists. One thing that we have noted is that many times when we talk about safety and security or protection of journalists, many times we tend to think that it's only security agencies that oppress the journalists. And yet, we have other oppressors. Number one, We have the economic giants in this country. Secondly, we also have well-connected religious leaders. They also oppress the journalists. But also, we have our bosses. We have the sources. We have the workmates. They also oppress us, particularly female journalists. So we need to have a whole package, not only talking about security agencies, but all of us are responsible for this. Then secondly, we also went ahead to explore the impact of impunity. If we fail to address the issues surrounding the security and safety of journalists or the media in Uganda, what is the cost? Number one, the journalists, particularly the senior journalists, are leaving the profession. That is one of the impact. So if we have got senior journalists leaving the profession, what does that mean? Some of the stories will be left untold, and that affects the development of this country. Then secondly, this profession is going to be left in the hands of the young people. Unfortunately, some of them are inadequately trained, and they are also inexperienced. So if we don't have the wisdom of the seniors, then we have problems with our profession and also with the country at large. Then secondly, if we fail to address issues to do with the safety and security of journalists, both the citizens and the leaders, we are going to live on fear. Fear of the unknown. And what happens to our country? It will go astray. But now, I want to go back to the reason why we're here. How can we protect or end impunity? The question or the answer is very obvious, because the UN Plan of Action 2012 on safety and security of journalists and the issue of impunity says it all. We are told that this one was crafted in 2012, and it was adopted by different countries. It is a comprehensive document. But what is it that we have done in this country? Other countries have gone ahead maybe, but what about Uganda? If you read that document, it is beautiful. We are talking about different stakeholders taking the issues or actions towards the safety and protection of journalists. So I think we need to pull our socks as a country and ensure that the safety of journalists is well taken care of. Then I want to move to the question of the practical examples of what is it that we have to do. Number one, as we're interacting with the female journalists, by the way, we interacted with, at least this year, about 120 female journalists. What we found out is that most of the female journalists are not aware of their rights. Most of the female journalists are not aware, or they have not even done a course or an orientation in safety and security. Out of 116 female journalists, only 10 had participated in a training organized by HRNJ. So what does that mean? If you don't have the information, if you don't have the knowledge, so you're going to be vulnerable. Then secondly, especially the female journalists, we need to train them to build their confidence, to articulate issues. A no should be a no, so that they are not taken advantage of. So the issue that I'm trying to say here, we need to do more training on the subject matter. but also on the safety and security, on human rights and the like, for the journalists, not only journalists, but the rest of the people, so that we can stand up for our rights. Then secondly, we also need to revise the media training curriculum to include safety, to include a component on safety and security. This is so important because the graduates leave the schools of journalism when not knowing what will happen to them. So they just bump into the field. So if we had a course unit on safety and security, I think that would go a long way. Then definitely as journalists, we need to know the law, the operating environment and the like. Then definitely as Emily mentioned, does the profession pay? That is a very big issue. Women journalists, for example, we are vulnerable. If we don't have economic sustainability, we are going to be, we shall be sexually harassed, you know, a favor for a favor. So we need to work with both private and public sectors to teach the female journalists, but also the male journalists, to start having some income generating activities to supplement their meager resources. Because if you are poor, you're going to be vulnerable. And then what about the media houses?
Mrs. Sentami, you have 1 minute to go.
Okay, fine. The media houses. What we need to do as media managers, we need to orient the fresh graduates. What we found out was that most of the media houses, if they do orientation of these young people, they never talk about safety and security. So we need to incorporate safety and security concerns in the orientation programs. We need to have a gender responsive environment within the media houses. We must have a gender focal person out there so that they can be listening to us, not only as females, but also but also the male. There's quite a lot to do, we as media managers, because we are not professional. We never follow up these journalists in the field. When something happens in the field, the media manager will be more interested in the gadget. Is my camera ready? Is my camera okay or not? They don't have insurance policies. There's so much that we have to do. We don't provide protective gear. We don't issue out identification cards. Then the other one, as I conclude, I had a lot because I've told you we have been in the field, and I really want to share this with everybody. So in conclusion, let's try to operationalize that plan of action. Civil society has got a lot to do in terms of advocacy, giving us other support. But then again, the security agencies, you are 90% responsible for what is going on. But then again, the journalists, we need to keep professional. But as I conclude, as we talk about all these things, it's about the political question. If you have a well-governed country, everything will go in place. You ask yourself, why do we have to have all these incidences during a political season? We are asking ourselves, security agencies, did you ever go to school and learn human rights? It's not about having these football matches with you. It's about empathy. What if it was you? What if? We're talking about getting back to the values, human dignity. Let's not talk about we are implementing things from above. Kind of reason, what is the impact? What if it was Margaret, your daughter? You get? So I think for me, in conclusion, Rukushana, these stories have been told. Next year we shall be here. Next year we'll have many more human rights defenders defending against what? Today as we talk, we have got so many human rights organizations coming up. But why? There is a problem in the country. We don't want to invest in human rights defenders all the time. We need to get all those resources, invest them in an economy that is going to benefit everybody. Because the more human rights defenders that you have, that is an index that your country is not doing well. There is a problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret Sentamo Masagazi, for that passionate appeal. And thank you for joining us this morning, despite not feeling very well. So we do appreciate your contribution to this discussion. And Emilian, I'll get back to you in just a short while. I'd like to loop in Carlton Scovia right now. Carlton, you know firsthand what it means to be in the thick of, covering a story and being at the receiving end of violence. And my question to you really is, as someone who is in a media house, to what extent would you say the media or media houses are the media is adequately trained and equipped on best practices on safety and dealing with impunity in the line of duty?
Thank you very much, Rukshana. The problem might not be equipping the journalists. In all the 9 cases UNESCO points out that are unresolved, a few of them talk about how media houses equip their journalists and prepare them for the worst in the field. When I was covering the elections in between December and January, actually right from the nominations in October to January, every journalist that was assaulted was ably identified and had their safety vests on. Just imagine a situation where 5 armed men go to arrest a female journalist, only having a notebook and a phone. A female journalist only with a phone and a notebook, and is identified with a safety vest and the working equipment. So the problem here might not be how media houses are equipping their reporters to go in the field. Yes, somehow it's lacking, where in terms of emergencies, we sometimes go to the field when we're less protected. For example, I'll draw your flashback to the ugly scenes at the UN Human Rights Headquarters in Kololo in February. None of those reporters was ready for those ugly scenes. But you saw how the army beat everybody, and the crime was reporting a story on human rights. So in our struggle to end this impunity, where is the problem, as everybody was pointing out? Impunity is that police officer who refuses to enter my case against a senior police officer. In the campaigns, my colleague Ali Mivule was assaulted. You all remember the collateral damage. I witnessed myself who shot at him, who targeted him, and they were actually running after everybody that saw what they had done. Every police officer in Masaka declined to enter that case. And it is okay. To the senior officers, it is okay. But it starts from that ground. Because this junior thinks they will not survive tomorrow if they enter a case against their commander. The judiciary, Dr. Emily noted that the problem these issues persist is the weak judicial system. The judiciary is not strengthened enough. I'll give an example. How many cases of by courts of law? I want to uphold HRNJ, and I want to appreciate the commendable work you did to see that justice is received in the case of DPC, former Old Kampala DPC. You'll be surprised that the people who beat up journalists in Kololo, the people who beat us during campaigns, the people who intentionally sprayed tear gas at us in campaigns, nobody has been punished, and they are okay. What picture, what image do you give to the junior officers out there? Because you've put out an environment that it is okay to beat a journalist, and you walk away with it. We all want to work in the same environment, like Senior Kaima said. There is goodwill to work in the same environment, and we can ably work together. But you've drawn a thin line between a journalist who covers an opposition candidate and a journalist who covers the president in power. I'll give an example. I've covered the president several times. When there is a line they don't want you to cross, they gently tell you, for this reason, you cover from this direction. When you're covering an opposition candidate and there is a line the police doesn't want you to cross, or the army, it's a tear gas canister that puts you away. But we want to work in the same environment, and we are advocating for it. But where is the problem? Why is it very hard for the commanders and everybody in the security forces to say, this is work. Your duty is to protect me. My duty is to inform the public. But why do we always collide, and why do we always say, journalists are sided, journalists are this? Just like you don't just tear gas a journalist covering a candidate in power, the same way you protect them. We all envy to work in an environment where we are protected by the state. So just like you cover that journalist, is the same way I wish to be protected when I'm covering the person possibly you don't like, or possibly somehow is against what you believe in.
And I'd like to interject at this point, Scovia, with a question to SSP Emilian. So you talked about having conversations on violence and this kind of behavior almost on a daily basis in your boardrooms from top to the bottom level. But my question is, are there actually processes, policies and procedures within the forces that drive accountability and keep the officers in check?
Yes, they are there.
Are they working?
That question should be coming from the journalists to see, because it's them who tick or cross. We believe the will is there and the processes are there. And from what Scovia says, if you go to the police station and they don't record your case, you feel intimidated, you feel unvalued, and probably you want to go away. But then you shouldn't. Your media house, HRJ, and the other organs that should protect everyone should come in and voice these concerns, because it does not start and end with the officer who has not entered this case. It doesn't. He or she has supervisors, and we have mechanisms to check on these excesses if they do exist. And if we keep asking where the problem is and we can't touch the problem, it's going to be a cycle that never ends. So the will on the part of the police to protect everyone, including journalists, is total. It's there.
But how can it be total when the officers on the ground, the lower cadre officers, are having trouble actually entering these cases?
I think it's individual
So where
weakness.
is the will?
My feeling is that it's individual weaknesses on either side. If I go to report a case as a journalist and they don't enter, well, you are not going to command them, but you should know what to do, because there are levels of command which are clear. I don't stop at this one individual officer, one individual station. I don't stop at that. If you do, then you give them chance to abuse you another time. And then you will listen, you'll begin to censor yourself, you'll begin to think about leaving and going to do work that gives you comfort. And that's not acceptable. From what Madam Sentam says, that's true. If the seniors leave, what will the juniors do? Holding people to account is not a piece of cake. You stand your ground and you demand that this is done. The individual journalist who is a victim of this could be weak, I accept. What is the media house? Where are the other organizations? So that will bring this officer or this number of officers to book. When we punish one of us, when we investigate and take him to court and secure a conviction, isn't that a good job for all of us? Can't we pick a leaf from that and then we multiply it? That should speak. And then we should not cease to demand for the best from all actors.
Now, we've seen and heard the Commander-in-Chief speak out on a number of issues related to the conduct of the forces in regard to violation of rights. I'm keen on hearing your thoughts on what it would actually take to have full accountability from the top to the bottom.
In terms of the police?
Forces.
Of course. Let me tell you, human rights is not an issue that we do casually. It's a demand placed on all of us, and human rights is even part of our curriculum, so monitoring and our field work involves that. But because we are humans, the excesses keep coming, and the mechanism to check the excesses are there. So question, do we just talk about these things and leave them in boardrooms like this? If that's the feeling of everyone here, then we are in trouble. We don't. Many officers disciplinarily have suffered, have been punished because of abuse of human rights. So issues of safety and security are critical for everyone. And we take that very, very religiously. Very, very religiously. We don't play about this. So really, for those who want to hold everybody to account, don't cease fire. For me, that's my message. Don't cease fire. Even when you think nobody listens, don't cease fire.
Okay. Let's just quickly turn to the subject of media credibility and trust. Carlton, and this goes to you. What's your take on that? I mean, Dr. Emily, and I quote, said, journalists need to take their role seriously and actively seek to influence laws and policies that affect them, shine their spotlight in the perceived weak judicial system, exemplify democratic principles, and have the courage to ask good questions. End quote. Are we taking our role seriously as journalists?
To some extent, we do. To some other extent, we need to do better. We need to understand the environment we work in. We work in an environment where sometimes it's hard to investigate or to do that very serious story that holds power to account because of the threats and all that. There is a lot of censorship. You might be knowing there is a lot of censorship going on, and it's the reason you cannot just simply do a story on all the brutality that Afande Kaima talks about, and all the unabated crimes against journalists and every Ugandan going on. But to some extent, I agree we need to do better. As journalists, we need to invest more in underground work, underground investigations. But the question is, where will you publish those reports? The censorship I talked about involves our media houses and our media managers. It's not very easy. I'll tell you, it's not very easy to do a story against, how can I say it? It's not very easy to do a story against the big people. Before the story goes on air, phone calls are in. It will take very independent media organizations, and it will take very independent working spaces to have those stories out. That's why very critical reports are aired by international media organizations. I'll give an example of the BBC's documentary, Three Killings in Kampala. I understand every media house has those videos, but where will you play them from? All the TV stations. Because before you announce the story, your license is being threatened to be withdrawn. So we need to invest in more of our work, underground work, but we also need to advocate more on media independence, because if we are not independent, then we cannot do that underground work.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to wrap this up in a few minutes, I'd just like each one of you to just give your parting shots on what you feel clearly all the different stakeholders have to do more, right? Just quickly wrap up what you believe in each of your respective areas. For example, what the media needs to do more of, what the forces need to do more of, and SSP Emilian, unfortunately, you represent, while you're here representing the Uganda police, you also speak for the other armed forces, because they are not, you speak for the forces because you work very closely together. Just very quickly, what do you believe needs to be, what more can be done, on what are we committing to do more of to end this impunity?
I need to correct you. I represent the Uganda Police Force.
When we see you, we see the forces.
Not the others. But we work closely, and for everyone in this country, we give you the service. We are your servants. And this, all officers feel this. If they don't, make them feel it. So we are here to give a service. We take issues of safety and security very, very important. And I think what we have to do is to listen more of these and find recommendations and stick to them through peer reviews. Can we review what we agreed on? My boss sometimes asks, do you read from the book of Lamentations or Acts of Apostles? We need to read more from the Acts of Apostles. What are we going to do? So ours is a commitment, one, to protect journalists and of course to protect everyone out there, to do their job without harassment, without intimidation. If that happens, let's follow through with the laws. And we said at 3 levels. 1, criminal justice is there to help. So media houses, organizations that are a little bit more powerful than the individuals, can we support them? Can we support these individuals to see justice so that when she moves around, she's not intimidated? Lastly, I love writing. And sometimes I write things that annoy other people. So one time I wrote a story, an opinion that tend to annoy many women than men. Oh, I got to be intimidated, but of course I'm hard to intimidate, from very many people, especially women. So my boss asked, will you survive these ladies out there? I said, let's see what happens. Because of an opinion, and people are very, very angry with you. It's okay to express that without intimidation. So if she feels intimidated and her media house is not helpful, the organizations meant to protect them is not helpful, should just walk out of the profession. And that shouldn't happen. So our commitment from my boss and from the institution I serve is we are committed to keep improving the environment in which journalists serve this country, because we all benefit from the information that they research and bring forward to us. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Emilian Kaima. And that commitment shall be checked consistently, and the proof of the pudding in the case. Please.
I want to inform Afandekam and everybody that information is power. An informed person is an empowered person. And we cannot retire from informing the people, no matter the amount of impunity that's at play. But also we want to see your commitment by starting with the unresolved cases out there committed by the police officers under your department or under your jurisdiction to see that there is justice. Those cases are well documented. We can start with the cases that happened in the just concluded elections. They're well documented, evidence is there, but somehow, because of the weak judicial system, we're not doing enough. We've provided these solutions before, but possibly the music they play is too loud to hear our voices. But we want to see an environment where justice is quick. Because justice delayed is justice denied. Why should it take months when there is evidence? Why should it take years to resolve a case against journalists? So my prayer is that there is goodwill and enough goodwill to see that the environment is improved, because we are not going to retire from journalism. This is a calling, and we have to inform the people. We have to work. How we operate is how we should improve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scovia. And I'm just going to make a request for someone to help me just get this microphone to Madame Margaret Masagazi so she can make her very, very brief parting shots as we wrap this session up and go for a tree break. And even as she comes to speak, I'd just like to announce that our State Minister for National Guidance is here, and he will be closing the session a little later on this morning.
Okay, my parting shot, yes. One, I think as media professionals, we should not sit back and think that things will happen in our favor. We need to fight for our space. And secondly, there is a need for continuous training of different stakeholders. Even us who are trying to do some advocacy, we lack those skills. So we need to be trained in advocacy and negotiation skills. Then our role as media will be affected. And we have to keep on fighting. Role of the media, I don't want to repeat myself, but thank you so very much. We really need to take this battle to the public court and ensure that media is for everybody. The role of the media helps a lot the government, because without us, really, you will not be telling the other people what you want. Your government programs will not be appreciated and not even implemented. So we need to have that mutual respect and seriousness in everything that we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And a big round of applause to our panelists this morning. SSP Emilian Kaima, Ms. Scovia, thank you so much. This is Ms. Margaret Masagazi, Senator Masagazi, thank you so much for joining us and for having a candid conversation. Now, we will take a very short 5-minute break just to allow you to stretch, stand up, stretch, grab a cup of coffee or a glass of juice, and let's get back to, in just 5 minutes. Please remember, for those of you who are joining us online, to share your questions or comments using hashtag #EndImpunityUG21, and we will be taking them shortly. When we return, we're going to have a look at the East African perspective on the realities for journalists from the Committee to Protect Journalists in Nairobi, Kenya, and then we'll have the open Q&A session. And then right after that, we'll hear from the African Institute for Investigative Journalism, and then close the event with a word from our State Minister for National Guidance. So please stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee, and let's resume in 5 minutes. That's at exactly 11:30. Thank you. And at this point in our session, we'd just like to hear from the Committee to Protect Journalists, that's CPJ, on the realities for journalists in East Africa. And that is a presentation by Mudhoki Momo, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya.
My name is Mudhoki Mumo. I am the Sub-Saharan Africa representative for the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. We are an international press freedom organization. I am speaking to you today from Nairobi, and I am honored to join you in the commemoration of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. I will speak briefly to provide a regional context for the dialogue we are having today on the question of impunity. First, some figures. 278 journalists have been murdered over the last decade, according to our research at CPJ. This number does not include journalists who were killed in conflict situation, covering combat caught in crossfire, for instance. It doesn't include journalists who are on dangerous assignments. These 278 journalists were deliberately targeted and murdered in connection to their work. And in 81% of those cases, there has been complete impunity. No one has been convicted. No one has been held accountable for the murders of these journalists. Now, unfortunately, some of the countries with the worst records when it comes to impunity in murders of journalists are right here in our region, in the Eastern Horn of Africa region. For instance, Somalia has for a long time, for years, been at the top of CPJ's impunity index. The index is an annual report that spotlights countries where the murderers of journalists are not brought to justice. South Sudan also features prominently on that index. Now, this is a reflection of how conflict, political instability, and weak judicial mechanisms come together to enforce a cycle of violence against journalists. But if you look beyond those two countries, if you look beyond Somalia and South Sudan, the rest of the region doesn't look so good either. Things are not rosy. For instance, the journalist community here in Kenya continues to demand justice for Francis Nyaruri and John Kitui, two journalists whose fearless coverage of corruption and politics led to their murders. And if you look at Ethiopia, this year, for the first time since 1998, we at CPJ documented the killings of two journalists. Now, that's a reflection of the drastic deterioration in the press freedom environment in Ethiopia, particularly since the start of the Tigray War. Now, these numbers, these figures are startling, but let's not forget the stories that they tell. These are stories of lives lost. These are stories of families and friends who continue to live without answers, who continue to live without justice. These are the stories of the colleagues of these journalists who must now work in an environment of fear, always wondering, could I suffer a similar fate? Could it be me if I told similarly critical stories of politics or of human rights or of corruption? But this is also about untold stories. Stories that remain untold because journalists were silenced. Now, impunity doesn't just manifest when journalists are fatally attacked. For instance, if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that in this region, in Kenya, in Uganda, In Rwanda, the COVID-19 pandemic has been associated with a rise in the harassment, in attacks, in the arrests of journalists. And we know that in Uganda, during the recent election season, numerous journalists were assaulted, were harassed, had their equipment damaged, and some of them were even shot at while covering the elections and the campaigns that led up to them. And in Tanzania and in Burundi, the journalist communities continue to demand answers about the fates of Jean Bigirimana and Azori Gwanda, two journalists who've been missing for years without credible investigations. Now, when you look at all these incidents, whether it's a knife attack in Somalia that kills a journalist, whether it's a journalist beaten in Kampala, whether it's a journalist killed in Ethiopia, there's a thread that runs through, and that thread is impunity. The failure to hold perpetrators accountable in credible and transparent processes creates an environment, nurtures a culture where others know they can attack journalists without consequence. It creates a culture and environment where some even believe, indeed know, that they can kill journalists without consequence. The way forward, the answers, I think at the base of it, quite simple. No attack must go unaddressed. Not even what you consider the smallest of attacks should go unaddressed. All the perpetrators should be held accountable in processes that are fair, credible, and transparent. This is how we push back. This is how we hold the line. This is how we fight against impunity and attacks on journalists. And I want to challenge the public officials in this room to do what is their duty to ensure that justice is delivered for Ugandan journalists in every single incident of an attack on them. And I want to challenge everyone in this room to consider that this struggle against impunity transcends our national borders. As you fight for safety at home, consider the situation of the journalists operating in Somalia or in South Sudan or in Ethiopia. Tell their stories, demand justice on their behalf, and stand in solidarity for them. Because when things become difficult for you, we also hope that they will also come and tell you stories and stand in solidarity for you and demand justice on your behalf. We must all stand together across borders in this struggle against impunity. Thank you very much.
Just about attacking journalists. It's really about turning a blind eye to what's happening around us, but more importantly, not doing enough in terms of holding the perpetrators to account. No attack should go unaddressed, and fairness, credibility, and transparency are pivotal to ending impunity, and it will take collective effort. It must be collective effort, and we all have a duty to bring this to an end. Pointing fingers will not get it solved. We must collectively work together. Different stakeholders and different actors must work together. So we'd like to just open up the floor to a couple of questions for both our in-person audience and our online audience. And we will have a microphone going round. If you do have a question or a comment in relation to the discussion and the conversation we've had the whole morning, please just raise your hand, introduce yourself, let us get to know who you are and in what capacity you'd like to speak or ask a question. If it is a question and it's specifically addressed to someone in this room or one of the panelists, please do mention that as well. We have the microphone right at the center of the room. Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Muruk. Look, Ruk, some hard name.
Shana is fine enough. Thank you.
Namimba. Your Excellency, the leader of the delegation, European delegation in Uganda, thank you for making these arrangements to meet the journalists. To all the panelists and the journalists who spoke, there was some form of lamentation about failure on the part of government to protect journalists. But last week or Monday, I read an article in your same media channels that the journalists don't want to be licensed and don't want to be registered. They want to go to the field without. Now, do you expect government to protect you if it doesn't know you? I did a little bit of journalism sometime, but one thing I understood is that every profession to practice must do the following. You go to school, you are given the skills. The council in the charge of that profession receives your documents and sees you are fit and sends you to the registry to give you a license. You pay your money, they give you a practicing certificate. And then we send you to the market or to the wider space to correct. Well knowing that the government will be looking at your back. Now, if the journalists are saying we don't want to do that, why should you expect government to protect you? I had Mr. Kaima being grilled that in the work of security agencies, our constitution is very, very specific and uses command, not a may, shall. In doing their work, the security agencies must or shall respect and advance human rights. And I think they are doing that. They only go beyond to the random analysis journalists. I'm sorry to have used this example. Some of you may have been registered. But if you want to give the human rights UN there with paper, did you inform the police that we are going to do that? You wanted to do it freehand, and the security forces had to act. We still have laws on our law books. Section 40 of the Penal Code Sedition. Although in the Mwenda case, they said that one, but has anybody taken initiative to go and repeal or remove that registration from our law book? No, it is still there. So the police and the other security agencies will, because the law is still there. The journalists, it's up to you to go and tell the legislature to remove, the legislature to remove such an act, such a command from our law books. My advice to journalists, I am a lawyer and a journalist. My advice to journalists, one, when you finish your studies, go to the media council. The media council may have been refused with the UCC, but go to the media council, present your documents. Am I fit to practice journalism? If they find you fit, they will send you to the permanent secretary of Ministry of Information. You are saying there is no institute. No. The institute performs delegated functions of the PS. So the PS can act as the licensing person. You pay your money to URA, they give you the receipts, You put the PS, I want a PC or practicing certificate. If you don't do that, do not blame the security forces. Thank you.
Sorry, we didn't get your name, sir. The lawyer and journalist.
Oh, my names are retired Captain Vincent Vitatu.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution. Let us have the gentleman at the front. Please remember to introduce yourself, the capacity in which you speak, and keep the comment or question short.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Paulo Ekochu. I chair the council he has just been talking about.
The media council that wants to license the
Not
journalists
wants,
who don't,
not wants
who
to
don't want
license.
to be licensed.
The media council that the law gives the mandate to register journalists. Now, of course, I join my voice with his. I agree with what he's saying exactly. But I want to make just 3 quick short comments. One is on the thematic tone of our discussion today, the tenor of it. End impunity, protect journalists. I know Emily, one of my new very good friends that I have got in the last few years, and she's of such gregarious and sunny character. So whenever she's in the room, the place becomes bright and positive. So I would expect that as we discuss everything with a positive outlook to it. But what I'm getting from here, of course, is a negative outlook. If, for example, we had said in our topic, the gains made to end impunity against journalists and to protect journalists, the story would be very, very, very different. We would be saying, can you imagine that now we have a senior police officer sitting in front of us, engaging with the journalists and saying, we care. We are trying to do the best we can to make sure it is happened. We would be saying, since we started liberalizing the airwaves, we have over 5,000 journalists, and they're all practicing around Uganda, and we're tolerating them by and large. There are a few incidents, but we are working on them to make sure that they end. Such things is what enables us to move forward. When we talk positively, other than insistently talking negative and saying we are finished, we are doomed, we are gone, I think it's important to talk positive. I think those who are motivation speakers like you, Rukushan, you tell us what you think and believe is what you become. If you think negative, you're going to repress. Anyhow, the second point is the issue of impunity. When you point fingers, we were told when we were growing up that when you point at someone, there are 3 pointing at you. Are journalists also in their practice exercising impunity? Do they cloak themselves with the appellation of journalism to be able to do whatever they want? Somebody goes to a security area and just walks in and says, I'm a journalist, allow me to enter. Of course, Mr. Kaima will say no. And if you insist, he will have to use force. I do not for one moment condone any wrongdoing against any individual, be it a journalist, be it anyone. And it's wrong. And all those incidents that have been talked about definitely are regrettable and should never happen again. And as a country, we should try our best not to allow them to happen again. But we are a democracy growing, so it is a process by process, as they say. So we should look at it knowing that we are getting somewhere. And by the way, journalists should also do what they say. Have you ever noticed that when journalists wrong someone on the papers, there's a huge headline in the front and it's all wrong and false. Then there's a complaint and there's a correction. The correction comes in the second page in a small corner. It doesn't come in the same flashing headline that you saw. But they want that if the police is doing something, you must come immediately and do this. So preach and do what you say as well. If you expect, like the captain said, to be protected, you must be the one to start within yourselves, to school yourselves to do the right thing all the time. And now what is the right thing? To be law-abiding citizens. I remember when the first COVID lockdown happened, a few journalists, one was beaten in Mukono at night.
Very briefly.
Yes. Another one was beaten somewhere in Kampala. So immediately, we saw there was a problem. We sat down with the leadership of the police And we said, please, they must do their work. And we immediately issued press cards for all journalists who wanted to move during the curfew time to be able to move. And that immediately ended the assaults on them. Fast forward to the election. We said, we saw the first riots in November. We said, this cannot happen. We're going into election. Election is a hot time. Let's engage with the security forces so that we allow journalists to practice their vocation freely during this election. We start with the leadership of EC, start with the leadership of police, and we agreed again, let's issue press cards, not for registration, for accreditation to be able to move freely during the election and for your safety. What happened? The journalists, Robert is here, is he gone? Went to court and stopped the process. Now, the process was going. I can assure you, out of the 174 cases that you have, I see mentioned somewhere, not one of them was a person carrying a media council press card. Because we had agreed with the forces that this is the modus operandi. Let the state know who you are, so that when you get there, you are not assaulted in any way. You are known.
Thank you very much.
What he's saying.
I
Lastly, before I close, please allow me the latitude for just a minute or so. The issue of how to go forward, training, we know that so many of the people who call themselves journalists are not journalists in the strict word. We need to empower them, and we're trying to do that. Two, you as the journalists yourselves need to empower yourselves to learn how to manage situations. Okay? This issue that we're discussing here is not peculiar to Uganda, and I think even in the remarks by His Excellency the Ambassador, he said it's an issue in Europe and everywhere else. But we shall work towards it. And I as chairman of the council and together with my leadership in the politics, we shall make sure that journalists will be able to practice in Uganda safely and professionally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's have the microphone first move to the back of the room. Please remember, just keep your contribution short. Our time is fast spent, and we still have to hear from the Africa Institute of Investigative Journalism. Sorry. Where's my microphone?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Wakabi, an illegitimate journalist.
An illegitimate journalist?
Yes, I'm illegitimate because I've never complied with any of these directives. I spent decades fighting the law established in the Media Council, and I've been waiting for them every day.
Michael, let's get to your comment.
To take them to court, to take me to court, and we settled that. But I just want to comment that the views expressed by Councillor Kocho and our brother here from ISO demonstrate just one thing, that impunity is embedded in our culture. And sometimes I wonder whether we are smart in presenting ourselves as an exclusive group that needs special protection. Of course, we do a special job, and we really deserve to work in a safe environment. Then journalists cannot be safe in the same environment. I think we need to look for strategies of engaging with the community to bring them on board. Not even telling them that, we need your support, but just, try to get them to appreciate democracy and appreciate democratic values. All the journalists that have been battered were never given the opportunity to even identify themselves. I remember James Akena during the November riots. The security people that clobbered him did not ask him to show accreditation to prove that he was a journalist. So Councillor Choko's argument does not hold water. When we come down to the security organs, a person at the hierarchy of the police force is on record defending the actions of his officers, criminalizing journalism. So I'm sorry.
Must of necessity address that vulnerability. And I will share the experience of Uganda Human Rights Commission, because it is one of the institutions where these matters should be adjudicated. Now, journalists are vulnerable because they lack job security. There is vulnerability that comes out of the low expectations from these judicial processes. If you are to take your case of assault to the court and it spends 5 years in court, your equipment was destroyed, your tools were destroyed, wouldn't you rather negotiate under the table and get your equipment in 1 month or less and continue working? That's the vulnerability I'm talking about. Now, because of that, the Uganda Human Rights Commission is seeing a trend. Journalists file complaints at the commission when such things happen. Some of the complaints, the Uganda Human Rights Commission reaches out to the journalists to record cases and start processes for justice. But what happens along the way? The journalists disappear. So the commission remains. In fact, one of the cases, the journalist disappeared when it was already at the tribunal, in the tribunal hearing. So what we have found out is that the aggressors negotiate with their victims and pay them off. So they lose interest in the cases. Unfortunately, they don't come back to inform the commission that we have lost cases, because they also don't want to be seen to have negotiated. So they keep saying we filed our cases at the commission and nothing is being done. So more than 50% of the cases that are at the commission are stuck because the affected journalists disappeared. They lost interest in the case. I have heard a government functionary, I won't state who, bragging about the ability to negotiate and end the matters under the table. So I will end this with a story told about a man in Mbarara. I'm a Munyankole, so I'm not committing any sectarianism, who was charged with assault of a neighbor and fined 50,000. After that, he said, okay, now I have known your price. I'm going to beat you and give you 50,000. That is what is impunity. And that is what quickly comes to my mind when I look at the impunity against journalists. The security forces, I won't mention specifically, but there is one specific one. They are very good at beating journalists and paying them off. Lastly, and the unfortunate bit, the implication is that as a fraternity, we will not get any jurisprudence or precedence from the court processes, from adjudication processes that provide collective protection, because one person has decided to negotiate their case against under the table. But that is also because of the vulnerability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just take a couple of comments that came through our social media platform as we close this session before we go into the next session. On Twitter, we have Save Uganda 25 that tweets, "There is no democracy without media freedom and pluralism. Independent journalists protect freedom of expression and guarantee access to information for all. They are the cornerstone to democracy, be it in Uganda or around the world. The impunity for for crimes against journalists must stop. And then moving on, this is Muau Mushin on Facebook, and he says, the EU, we're not against development partners, but we're against those who preach democracy and continue working with dictators. Another comment off Facebook is journalists should just police their language. They should choose their words rightly before forming a sentence. And I'm reading these verbatim, so there's no editing. They should follow ethical codes of conduct and communicate rightly, not speculation. They should take precaution of any news to protect the sovereignty of their country. They should not provoke security agencies. This will protect them. That is a view held by Tiondi Jordan. And these are in no way views of the organizers of this event, but personal views of the people that have submitted them. At this point in time, we'd just like to invite the Executive Director for Africa Institute for Investigative Journalism, AIIJ, Solomon Serwanja. Please come and make your presentation.
Thank you, Rukhsana. On the 1st of April, the Human Rights Network for Journalists released a report. And that report seems to be coloring our conversation today. And I'm so happy to see Mr. Sempala in the room, because I think his sole responsibility is to look out for journalists. So let's give him a round of applause. Mr. Sempala, we celebrate you. Thank you very much for the work that you do for the journalism fraternity. Every year, Mr. Sempala compounds all the cases of journalists who have been beaten, battered, and some of them broken. And so it's not fair for us to just speak from anecdotes, because there's several reports that have been documented to provide evidence that journalists are being beaten and some of them battered. Sadly, if you look at the report that was released, it points to police and the UPDF for being top offenders and people who have beaten journalists. And what that tells us is that the security forces continue to commit these atrocities. What you're about to see, I ask that I take part of my 20 minutes that I was given to present to you a story that was said by the journalists themselves who covered the elections. I didn't have anything to do with this documentary. What I did was to document it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to watch this documentary. It's 10 minutes, and then I'll be back to give my closing remarks. That documentary is called Targeted. We have a shorter version. So, I'd ask the guys who are handling with the lights, coming from a broadcast background, I ask that we sort of dim the lights a little bit more, and we have enough audio. Okay. All right, thanks. For the next, I'll be back after 10 minutes.
I was pepper spray. I was beaten. Pointed it at me.
Very many journalists were beaten. Caned. We shall beat you for your own sake.
They're going to be beaten and many will probably be killed.
Just live bullets flying. None of us was sure we were going to survive. I strongly believe it was a target. I strongly believe it was a target. I strongly believe it was a target.
the two main candidates for the Ugandan presidency.
Today we look ahead to January the 14th and Uganda's presidential election.
The government faces protests and widespread condemnation.
The new face of Uganda's opposition.
I was assigned to join the campaign trail of the National Unity Platform flag bearer, Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu.
From start, we just knew we were heading for the worst, because as he was moving from Kampala, moving through Luweero, going to Arua, I just imagine it's not going to be like the normal campaigns. It wasn't business as usual.
I joined the trail 2 days after it had started. We found the team had already left Lira and Gulu, so they were coming towards Teso sub-region, and particularly we found them in Katakwi. The first thing that welcomed me and my camera person was a canister, a tear gas canister, thrown right at our car that we were just leaving. It's a public car, I mean, and the tear gas canister.
I don't know if I should go to the PS to give me the license to practice. Oh, you ready? Okay. If you're ready, then it's okay. Then I'll come back.
Many journalists were beaten.
I was pepper sprayed. I was beaten.
Pointed it at me.
Very many journalists were beaten. Caned.
We shall beat you for your own sake.
They're going to be beaten and many will probably be killed.
Just live bullets flying. None of us was sure we were going to survive. I strongly believe it was a target. I strongly believe it was a target. I strongly believe it was a target.
The two main candidates for the Ugandan presidency.
Today we look ahead to January the 14th and Uganda's presidential election.
The government faces protests and widespread condemnation.
The new face of Uganda's opposition.
I was assigned to join the campaign trail of the National Unity Platform flag bearer, Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu.
From start, we just knew we were heading for the worst, because as he was moving from Kampala, moving through Luweero, going to Arua, I just imagine it's not going to be like the normal campaigns. It wasn't business as usual.
I joined the 2 days after it had started. We found the team had already left Lira and Gulu, so they were coming towards Teso sub-region, and particularly we found them in Katakwi. The first thing that welcomed me and my camera person was a canister, a tear gas canister, thrown right at our car that we were just leaving. It's a public car, I mean. And the tear gas canister landed right there. And we had to scamper for our own safety.
The sounds of tear gas, the sounds of the bullets. First time coming across this explosive, is it called the sound bomb? That was really something that scared me for the months, 2.5 months that I was on the campaign trail.
There was no single day we did not inhale tear gas. There was no single day I did not hear a bullet. There's no single day I did not hear a tear gas canister. After a couple of days, we came to Luka, and that's one of the days that still stuck in my mind. I saw real confrontation and brutality.
During that operation, I realized being a journalist on the trail of the National Unity platform was really a tough one.
My eyes were already irritating. So I told all of them that I'm a journalist. You guys should stop irritating me. I'm a journalist. So one of them was like, no, you should calm down, this and that, you should calm down, you should not cover this. I continued holding myself, but the guy was so strong. He opened it and another person came and sprayed tear gas into my mouth.
On 27th December 2020, Kyagulanyi had just finished church from Chitovu Cathedral. We were going to Gomba district. Unfortunately, when we were just exiting Masaka town, there was a very big roadblock involving the police, the army. So the deployment was really heavy and the roadblock was very huge. Ashraf was live streaming all the events that would happen to Kyagulanyi. Unfortunately, on that day, Ashraf was hit. Up to now, I don't understand whether it was a rubber bullet or it was a tear gas canister, but really it was traumatizing for me. That was my worst experience. Ashraf was bleeding seriously. Everybody was crying. They thought he had died.
They carried Ashraf. As they were coming, tear gas intensified. They tried to put him into a police car that was waiting by. Police refused to drive the car to take him to hospital.
God was great. We reached Masaka Hospital. The medical attendants gave us attention. They attended to Ashraf, and later Bobby Wine had to suspend his campaigns to attend to Ashraf because Ashraf was just at the top of his car. So it means had the target missed Ashraf, possibly it could have been Honorable Kyagulanyi. So I'm very happy that God gave Ashraf a second chance.
There is this regional police commander from Abaine, Enoch Abaine. He was just a few meters from me. So he pointed that launcher and direct, he shot at me here, upper thigh. By the way, I still have this scar. So his colleagues, I remember Mochibi from the Field Force Unit. There is another guy from the Special Forces Command, SFC, and the counterterrorism officers tried to restrain the guy, but he couldn't listen. He fired again. Luckily, I had moved and it exploded somewhere. And you know, I'm just so lucky to be standing here and talking to you people. Maybe I would be some good meters into the ground.
5 armed military men came and picked me. When they picked me, well, I wasn't shaken. Like I was just expectant. Like I earlier said, everybody was a target on that campaign trail. They took me where Kalema was. As they were questioning me, they were questioning why I had posted on my social media that Honorable Kyagulanyi had been arrested. So they said, why do you make our work so hard? You make a lot of social media updates. Why do you make our work so hard? I asked them, what crime have I committed? They said, you're making our work so hard. You're inciting violence. Can you identify yourself? At that time, I had my phone with me. So when they said, identify yourself, I called my colleague to pick my identity card from the car. In the meantime, I had to post on my social media quickly that I'm not safe, I've been arrested. But then I was wondering, I think they were just buying time, because how do you ask for someone's identity, yet you're trailing their social media platforms? In about 10 minutes, they came for another colleague of ours, Derek Wandera.
They came, picked me. They asked me, are you live streaming? No. And I came to learn that he had known me, because when I reached there, he asked me, are you Derek Wandera? I said, yes. Are you from Daily Monitor? I said, yes. He told me, give me your ID. I gave him my ID. When he read my ID, he said, exactly, you're the person I've been looking for. He told me, you have been profiling officers who are doing their duty. You've been writing bad stories about them. And he asked me, why do you keep doing that? I said, but I'm trained to write about anyone and anything that I find is newsworthy. He told me that's not it. And he gave me my phone and he told me, now you might even be profiling me, you might even be recording me. From here, this is what you're going to write in your next issue. Can you break your phone and give me your memory card? I told him I can't break my own phone. And I saw him reaching out for his gun. I said, now what's wrong with this guy? So I felt for me to have peace, I broke my own phone.
It is the media targeting security. The media would like to portray security as being brutal, as being against the government itself. I think this is very unfortunate and we must put it clear. We are trying to protect your lives. We are telling you there's a danger there. For you are insisting you must go where there's a danger. Yes, we shall beat you for your own sake.
There's generally regulatory overreach by different institutions, and if we do not come to address those issues, we are going to see a degeneration of rights. We are going to see people like the IGP get away with statements that, will beat the media, will beat journalists for your own good, and then he'll laugh about it and journalists will record it and, move on. He needs to come to account. By now, we should be seeing a story of who are these, what's the history of these individual police officers or army officers who are torturing and beating up journalists. If we start to isolate those individuals, then perhaps it will send a message to the rest of the army officers and the police officers and security agencies. So it's very interesting that in a group it's easy for you to break the law, but when you're identified as an individual and we take you through the process of the law and then you're held to account. And I think going forward we should start a conversation where we entrench media rights within the police curriculum.
if by now no one has been arrested for torturing us, not me only, Kato or Usoga was arrested, was tortured, Chitimbo Thomas was tortured, very many people were tortured. No police officer has been arrested. And even when we call upon the government to do that, they don't even respond to you.
But again, we are not enemies of the state. We are just doing our job, and don't kill the messenger.
It is not very late for the media in Uganda to rise up.
These police officers and army officers who have gone on to torture journalists will one day pay for it.
Of the entire film. We have the long version, which is about 45 minutes that you can look out for. It's called Targeted. All we did was to just document these journalists' stories, and you've just heard them say what happened to them. We all know that media is one of the cornerstones for any democracy, and we all have a role and responsibility to protect the media. This is what is disturbing about this film and about what we've just heard. I have not seen the police come out to prosecute its own. Afande Media and Kaima, I respect you, sir, and you know that. What we have not seen is that if there's been any deliberate effort to bring the people who committed these atrocities to book. This is why we're here. And we believe that there's overwhelming evidence that shows that gross human rights violations were committed against the press and against the media. And we've not had the state act on that. I'm really excited because the police has... I saw a guy putting on a jacket with evidence collection team. It means that the police has collected different video footage that they can actually put up and examine and do a frame-by-frame analysis of what happened during the elections and put their men and women on the spot, either before the police standards unit or take them to court. I'll tell you this, many of the journalists who were beaten during the elections, Ashraf Cassidy himself, he lost his job. His mental status is not as good as it was. One of the journalists said in that film, and I think it was, someone from the Daily Monitor, Wandera, he says he's being followed. He fears to practice objective journalism. And so the acts that are committed against the media and the press have a very big impact on the way journalists cover stories. I mean, for a guy like Wandera from the Daily Monitor who has been objective and fair in his reporting, he's saying, I cannot live like this. I can't live like this. But there's not been any form of accountability against the men and women who committed these atrocities. And I think this is why we're here. And this is not new. I mean, Akena, I think one of the speakers here spoke about Akena. He was beaten. We all saw what happened. On the 17th of February, Bobby Wine was taking a petition to the UN Human Rights Council. Journalists were beaten and we moved on. Ugandans move on very fast. That is what is disturbing. They don't want to look back. I think someone is out there saying, why are you bringing back election things? We are trying to heal and move on. You know, this country has a future. Let's forget what happened in the election and forge a way forward. When there's not been any form of accountability, it's just, you know, I don't know. I am a married man. And I know that so many people here are married. Every time you have a grievance with your wife and you don't want to talk about it, and you sweep it under the carpet, you think it's going to be okay, and so you want to come back the next day and things are okay. It's not okay. That woman may serve you dinner, but she's keeping something inside her. And that man too who you hurt, you think he'll come back and he will keep quiet, and you think you'll go to bed and everything is okay. It doesn't make it right if you keep quiet. And sometimes we need to brave up and say, can we talk about it? Can we talk about these whatabouts? Because before you know it, you're going to split bedrooms and say, we're just living for the babies. Why? Because you did not talk about these crucial issues. I think that we need to have an honest conversation between Ugandans and the way the police and the military forces treat journalists. Every time we hide around it and say, you see, we all, just casually talk about these issues and nothing is done. It's not helping. I think we need to have an honest conversation, dear Ugandans. One of the person who was in that is Scovia. She's there. She was seated right here with Afande Kaima. These people have mental health issues. No one has helped them, deconstruct what they went through when they were covering elections. And many of us don't necessarily get concerned because we're in SCs. The 2020 elections was like a war front line. And until when we all get in their shoes, we will get to know what it really happens. Otherwise, we'll just debate and gloss over issues, and I have practiced. I know what it means being on the front line. I know what it means being beaten. And it really hurts when you're beaten and no one speaks up for you. Or sometimes when you hear people debating, you're sitting in your chair like, but do you actually know what I go through? So ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we're here is to talk about it. Let's not gloss over it. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Solomon Terwanja. I think AIIJ deserves a greater round of applause for documenting these stories and having them come to the surface. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the tail end of our program this morning, and I would like to invite the Minister of State for National Guidance in the Ministry of ICT, Honorable Godfrey Kabyanga, to come and make the closing remarks. And I am guessing that he may speak to some of the issues that we've just seen. Honorable, please come and make the closing remarks. We've come to the end of the program.
His Excellency, the head of EU Delegation, the General Secretary of UNESCO, I will observe all protocol because when you started, I was not here, so I may mess it up. I observe all protocol. First of all, I bring you greetings and apologies from my minister, Honorable Chris Pariumusi, who would have been here with you to perform this function, but he got an urgent call and delegated me. He's a very tall man and a giant, and I'm the opposite. But I always try to fit in that figure. It's a great pleasure to be here at the opening of a very important event that marks the International Day to end impunity against journalists. And it is very, very complicated to talk after all these videos and all your sentiments. But my friend Solomon has said we have to talk about it. And therefore, I have also come to talk about it. And it's not the first time we are talking about it. And it will not be the last time we are going to talk about it. But we have to talk about it so that we can heal. I thank the European Delegation and UNESCO who partnered with the media fraternity to organize this important event, where we are talking about ending brutality against journalists. Uganda is one of the countries which respect media freedoms. We have 2 articles in the Constitution which talks about freedoms. I think Article 29 is talking about freedom of speech. And then we have an Article 39 which is talking about access to information. We have even enacted other laws. We have the Access to Information Act. We have the regulations, Access to Information regulations. All those try to ensure there is media freedom and that journalists are free to access information. This country is the only country where a chief of defense forces comes out publicly to apologize to journalists, and it's on record. General Muhoozi, the former chief of defense forces, came out publicly to apologize to journalists. And I was expecting that my brother Solomon, after showing the video, he would have put this small clip that, by the way, CDF apologized. It would have brought out a ballast video. But if you just bring out that, then it's also unfortunate on behalf of journalists. This is the only country where the commander-in-chief, His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni, has come out to condemn that brutality in broad daylight. He even brings evidence of the brutality when he's talking. And the following day, there is a headline in one of the dailies, Museveni dishonest. What was dishonest about the president showing people that this brutality is not good? He even brings out letters which he has written to security organs and other organs of government that are supposed to protect people and property. And he said, I wrote this letter on this day. I wrote this letter on this day. And therefore this impunity should stop. And the following day, a daily comes out with a headline, Museveni dishonest. And after that headline, we called the newspaper, the management of that newspaper. And we said, we are not happy with this headline. Instead of serializing the speech of the president, they serialized the comments from the streets. It was very unfortunate, my brother Solomon Serwa. And the manager of that paper were in the Attorney General's office. And there are so many photos, portraits of all attorney generals who have been in that office. Do you know what he told us? He told the attorney general, KK, Honorable Chiro, that all these I have seen, they have come and gone. Solomon, we also have a story to tell. But obviously yours is a sad one. But we also, as government, have a story to tell. But sometimes we don't get the chance to tell our story. We are only invited to close ceremonies. But if you had told me to come with a story to tell about government, I would have come up with also a video. And I know even General tried these policemen. They have dismissed them. They have disciplined them. Why don't you say thank you to police for that? I think you can even clamp it. And you say more. What the police has done, at least, they have tried to discipline some of these policemen. We should commend them for that. And then we say, please, we need more action. Solomon, we are ready to take action. But we need your cooperation. There is freedom of speech. But how can someone say the president has died? Media. You see Opera News. President Museveni has died. Don't you think also President Museveni needs to live in the State House peacefully? Because there is freedom of what? Of speech. I want to say it takes two to tango. Yes, there are brutalities. My own president has accepted that there are brutalities and has condemned them. But also as journalists, we should demonstrate high level of professionalism. Journalism can destroy a country. Some of you who were old enough, in 1994, you saw what happened to Rwanda. One radio led to the death of 1 million people in 30 days. A radio. In those villages, some of us who come from very, very up-country villages, I come from Kasese. Someone just tells you the radio has said. You say, but who said? He said, no, the radio said. He doesn't know even the person who said. And for them, they think what the radio says is the truth. And therefore, I came here to appeal to you that let us cooperate and see how we make our journey smooth. The ministry now has a new leadership that has opened doors to journalists. Please come. We are the intermediaries between journalists and all these other agencies of government. This is yours. You should behave like lawyers, advocates, workers of court. So even you journalists are workers of the Ministry of Information, Communication Technology and National Guidance. Come to us. We are going to create good relationship between you, the journalists, and all agencies of government who you interact with in your line of duty. And that one, I promise you, and my brother Serwanga, Solomon, I have known you for a long time. I don't think I can close your door on me. And Jeno is here. We are going to bring peace among all these agencies who we work with. And I think that should be the way forward. We can't continue lamenting. We can't. Past is past. But it's good when you talk, you offload. And I am happy that you have talked, you have offloaded, but the ministry is there now to bring harmony amongst you. I have seen the EU here, European Union Delegation, is now training you on, I think, sensitive. They call it sensitive journalism. anytime when you're doing your work, you should be very, very sensitive. There are normally laws and guidelines governing that work. And there are so many occupational hazards that you should know you are going to face. When you are going to cover war, you should know it is not a discotheque. You are going to face people who are fighting. And therefore, you can be caught in the middle of the fight, even when you are not part of it. When you are going to cover an election, you should know there are occupational hazards related to elections. And therefore, you should be very, very cautious. When I came here, I reached the entrance of the hotel, and there is a checkpoint. I stood there to be checked. Because I know I can think I'm a minister, and I just move without even greeting the askari, and she embarrasses me. And I will be embarrassed. And they will just say, Minister harassed at hotel what? Africa. They don't even look at the one who harassed me. So I have to be very careful. I am a minister of government. But when I'm going to State House, I know that SFC is a very serious what? A very, very serious outfit. If they say stop, I stop. If they say move, I move. Because I know I can be what? Embarrassed. But there are some journalists after wearing that placard of praise. You think now you own the whole what? Situation. They are there. There are also journalists who have been bribed either to produce a story or to kill a what? A story. They are there. All those ethical issues are there. So if we tell our story, it will also be a long one. But today, you are telling your story, and I've listened to it. And I would like to promise you that this must end, because our president is committed to it. And Solomon, let us work together to end this, so that we understand the rules of the game, and if there is any problem, our agencies are here. We shall always work with them and try to bring peace between the press, the journalists, and the government. Because you are our workers, you carry the stories. For us, we cannot write stories. You are the ones who write the stories. So why should we fight you? Someone was saying, Media Council has merged with UCC. No, Media Council is still independent. The chairman is here. Media Council is supposed to regulate you. But do you know that you have refused to be regulated? Yes, there are some issues which we are working on, mainly issues to do with the qualifications. Because the qualification bar was put very high. And we are trying to work with the Media Council to see whether the qualification bar, because that is the biggest problem. But accept to be regulated. Because there are some people who are not even journalists, and they are posing as journalists, and you are looking at them. Someone is a DJ. You have heard of DJs. And then DJ, from DJ, you go to FM station, you start presenting music, and then the next, you are carrying a placard, press. Are you a journalist? So, my my partners, my development partners from the European Union and UNESCO, and can you train people to become journalists? Lastly, I beg you. Right now, there are no elections. Why don't you make documentaries of tourism? Uganda is now safe. But when the elections, you run. When Uganda is safe, you don't run any safety. Why don't you run now? Now we are safe. Why don't you run documentaries of tourism so that we know we are all in the same game? You are waiting again for elections to come. Another thing which I would like to beg you all, you are running a story, then you go and bring some video of 1994. Then you try to justify the other one. That one is past. So, Solomon, that is past. But you should concentrate on what is what? On what is current. So I would be very happy, Solomon, that you come to me and say, now I want to go to Queen Elizabeth National Park. I want to go to the Rwenzori Mountains. I will sponsor you. So that you carry out that documentary. And you give it the same popularity, the same airspace that you are giving to the brutality. So that the boat can do what? Can ballast. Otherwise, if the boat is not ballast, then it will be very unfortunate. My work was simple. I know I'm in the unfriendly force of people who have been brutalized. I think I will stop here and say, please, we shall give you maximum support as Minister of ICT and National Guidance. And please, we are part of you. And please, you are our workers. We should, yes, document brutality, but we should also document the good part about this country. I think that's what will make it. I now declare this function closed. Thank you very much. For God and my country.
Thank you very much, Honorable Godfrey Kabyanga, State Minister for National Guidance. And okay, we'd just like to, as we close, because the event has been officially closed, we'd just like to request the chief guest, His Excellency, our partners, to just come to the front, our panelists, come to the front and we take a group picture, please. And as they do that, we'd just like to thank the EU delegation, the Uganda National Commission for UNESCO, the event organizers, for creating a space where different key stakeholders can come together and dialogue on an issue of national and global importance. The importance of freedom of expression and the dangers that impunity for crimes against media professionals presents for freedom of democracy cannot be overstated, obviously. It is one thing to point the finger to security forces or the judiciary, but we all believe, as we have had, that there is room for all stakeholders, the media inclusive, to think deeply on what more can be done and how best there can be closer collaboration to put an end to impunity and protect journalists. This, of course, can only be possible where there is the rule of law. So a big thank you to all of you that joined us in person and those of you that joined us online. The event, the physical event ends here, but the conversation continues online, and the hashtag is EndImpunityUG21. Let us keep the conversation going. Let us not tire of having these dialogues in the hope that someday soon a solution will be found. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, this is yours. Just a quick announcement to our